In this video, I'm going to do 7.5 part 1. And basically what we are doing is we are factoring polynomials. So in this case, the polynomials are all going to be trinomials. So I'm going to have something like this, like number 1 in our note packet, c squared plus 8c plus 7. So what's going to happen is we are going to do something we call the x factor. Now, for those of you guys that may have been introduced to this earlier, it's going to look similar and behave similar to product sum. However, we're using an x to get the point across. So basically what's happening here is that the middle term goes at the top of the x. And this means that I'm going to have to add to get to this. We know that we have an 8, but make sure you put the sign in front. It's a positive 8. Now, the only way this works in its purest form is if there is a variable squared in the front with no numerical coefficient other than 1. So c squared counts for that because there is no other numerical coefficient in the front except for 1. So now that we have that established, we know that the bottom is going to be the last term, and in this case, a positive 7. So this is how it works. What two things multiply and make positive 7, but then add and make 8? Well, folks, we know the only way to make 7 is 7 and 1. So I have a 7 and a 1. So now to determine the signs with the 7 and 1, you have to ask yourself, what does 7 and 1 have to be to add and get 8? Well, to get 8, you're going to have to add the 7 and the 1 together. So they both need to be positive to give me the positive 8 up above. So now when we check it, we do 7 times 1 is 7, and 7 plus 1 is 8. So now that we have that established, we literally jump right into my answer. So we write the two groupings, but we need to know what to put into it. So the area or the variable squared actually has a concept that's real simple to do. In 6.3, we talked about square roots. And in 6.2, we talked about how to handle them in radical form. So in this case, since it is going to be the square of this, you have to square root it. In other words, in this case, you're going to take and break it in half. So half of c squared is c. And you put them in front of each grouping or in the front part of each grouping. The second half is very simple. You take the factors you found in the cross or in the middle part here, and you plug them in. So positive 7 and positive 1. And that's all you have to do. So let's go through a few more examples. And then I'm going to turn you guys loose to work some on your own. Now, the ones I'm going to pick are going to be a little different. So I'll do one more of the positive, and then we're going to do a couple negative ones. So look at letter number 2, and I have a squared plus 16a plus 64. So the first thing I do is make my x factor. We know we can do this because, once again, a squared has no numerical coefficient other than 1. So I take and I put the middle term at the top and the end term at the bottom. And I ask myself, what two things multiply and make 64, positive 64, but yet add and make 16? So remember, you're doing adding here, and to help you down here, remember this is multiplying. So multiply to get the bottom. So can we think of some things? Well, 64 can be made up of a variety of things. 4 and 16, 2 and 32. How about 8 and 8? Well, if you're not for sure, I always recommend listing them. So off to the side, I listed the different things it could be. And if you notice, they're all going to be positive because I have a plus at the bottom and a plus at the top, telling me that they have to multiply and give me a positive number, but add and also make a positive number. So in this case, they're both plus. So the only one that does that is going to be positive 8 and positive 8. So once again, the square root of a squared is basically cutting it in half and put an a in the front. And then you have plus 8 and plus 8. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the whole branch of this. So let's do a negative one now. Negative means a couple things. So if the bottom term or the last term, instead of being positive, is negative, that has a different outcome. So look at number 7. So number 7, we have b squared plus 3b minus 54. When we do our x factor, we're still going to fill this in with the positive 3. We know we can use the x factor because there is no numerical coefficient other than 1 in front of b squared. So we're going to have negative 54 here. So this one looks a little different. Since it's negative on the bottom, we still have to multiply and get negative 54, but we have to add or combine to get positive 3. So adding or combining to get a positive is no big deal. We've done it. However, the negative at the bottom, we need to rethink how we do this. So we know in order to get a negative answer, you have to have one positive and one negative. So that's what we're going to have to try to fill in here. So what two things multiply and make 54, but then in this case, combine and make 3? Well, the only two that I can come up with is 9 and 6. So 9 being positive and 6 being negative. Now, you may not have seen this right away, and if you didn't, do trial and error. If that's negative and this is positive, that would give me a negative 3. If that's negative and this is positive, in other words, flipping them around, then that gives me a positive 3. So now that I know which two factors work, we jump into our answer. We cut the b squared in half like we do with all of our squares. And we just write down plus 9 and minus 6. Now, we've done this. So what I'm going to do is break down, and we're going to put 2 more on the overhead, and you have to work these at your seats. So here we go. So for number 8, we have y squared minus y minus 2. Pause the video, try it on your own. Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video by now and that you're ready to go on. So this one's a little unique because we have a negative 1 in the middle. And if you didn't remember that, remember the variable can't hold its own value. It has to have the negative being attached to it. So in this case, I have negative 1 on top and negative 2 on bottom. Once again, it works because I have a y squared with no numerical coefficient other than 1. So what two things multiply and make 2? Well, folks, there's only one possibility, 2 and 1. Now, since the sign is negative on the bottom, we know we have one positive and one negative. Well, here's the thing. We know at the top I'm going to have a negative 1, and I want it to multiply and make a negative 2. So basically, we have to realize that the negative has to be attached to the bigger of the two factors. Now we can take and write down our answer. So we cut the y squared in half, and I have negative 2 and positive 1. All right, if you have any more questions, you guys know how to get a hold of me. The second half of this video is already under part 2, and I actually put in a little bit of 7.6 because 7.6 actually plays into this, and then there's a 7.6 video on its own. All right, good luck.